Have you ever noticed that when it rains, it pours? Like the week that your hot water tank goes, you run over your iPhone, your dog grows a goiter out of the side of its neck, and it's kind of like life has grabbed you and just gone, welcome to Earth, So you're just like overwhelmed with this sense of like things happening in threes and fours and sevens and 12s, and it just never seems to stop. Speaking of water tanks, my parents, no kidding, my parents, the week their hot water tank went, the one that came with their house, that week they brought it to the curb, and at garbage day there were 3 or 4 other water tanks on their cul-de-sac. There is something going on. It's not just built-in obsolescence. That's a conspiracy. That is the Illuminati right there. Working in tandem with the aliens and Lady Gaga. I know it. You know what I'm talking about, right? When things start collecting and you start making a list of the things that have gone wrong, you kind of go, there's something happening. And then you get the big 6 out. Do you know what the big 6 are? They're the questions, right? Then you get your detective hat on, you get all, detective, and you go, what? What's happening, and who, and where, and when, and how? And the big one is why. When bad stuff starts to happen to us, when pain starts to rake over us, when things start coming in waves, we ask the question, why? And it's a normal question to ask. Now, I just need to kind of lay what I'm going to say today on a foundation. As a statement, why is a powerful thing. So this is why I do what I do. This is my mission. This is my purpose. It motivates me. It propels me. But as a question, why can actually be debilitating. So how many of you have been a toddler? Okay, so just so you know, every person in this room has been unearthly annoying at some point in your life. And if you have a toddler, it's payback. It's really because when they discovered the question why, do you know they don't even care about the answer. They just know it bugs you. That's why they're asking it. Just FYI. Why, Mommy, Carlin, yeah, right? Mommy, why is the sky blue? Because it's blue, honey. Why? I don't know. Why? I don't know. I guess I wasn't paying attention in class that day. Why? Because I'm a bit of a deadbeat. I don't know. Well, why? Because I'm just a loser and I just don't understand. Like these why questions, they dismantle, they take your life apart. It's layer by layer by layer. And just so you know, there's certain kinds of why questions, there is no end. Like they don't end. There's always another why that you can ask. And in fact, I would say that if on any given question, if you're 2 or 3, 4 layers deep on the why, and you're still not at a better answer, you probably won't find one. Right? You know this is true. Why is a weird question. It can be a dangerous question. Now, today I want to talk to you about a guy in the Old Testament named Job. Some of you have read the book of Job before. Some of you have heard people talk about the book of Job before. Job is the guy in all of history, probably. If anyone deserved an answer to the question why, it is Job. Job, I'm just going to explain in a minute. Job woke up one day to that. He woke up and somebody had nuked his life from orbit. It was just gone. And if anyone ever deserved an answer to the question why, it was Job. And if anyone ever had an opportunity to get the answer to the question because he had God appear to him face to face, if anyone had the opportunity and deserved it, it was Job. So we're going to learn from Job. Now, I just want to insert something here because some of you who know me go, Brad, your life is way too easy. You can't speak on pain. I know. That's why I'm invoking Job because I've had some hard stuff happen to me, but I know that some of you have experienced pain that I cannot even comprehend. Again, so I invoke Job because I know Job beats everybody. So You don't believe me? Okay, so I'm going to read to you what happened to Job, okay? This is crazy. One day, this is right from the beginning of this book. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, trouble. None of you see the trouble in that? Okay, never mind. Your kids will grow up, you'll see. Okay. Drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job. Now, before I jump into what happens next, I just want to read you a few things about Job, okay? Look at this. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, had a great number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. This is like Donald Trump, but with money. Crazy. Okay, so a messenger came to Job and said, oh, okay, so sit down. He didn't say that, but I'm sure this is what's just not written down. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. And they put your servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. In other words, hundreds of oxen are gone, and these donkeys are gone, and the servants are killed. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them, and they put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, I told you, he's got you beat. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, it collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. And that was just the first day. On the second day, as Job is sitting in shock in the rubble, the smoldering ruins of his former life, he breaks out all over his body in painful boils. And all he can think to do is he's sitting in the ashes, is take some broken pottery from more of the stuff that he got broken in the disaster and lance the boils that are all over his body. This is what he's doing for his free time. And out of the mist, out of the smoke, an angelic figure begins to walk towards him. It's his wife. Oh, she made it. And she walks towards him and leans forward. This, I don't know if it happened, but puts her hands on his cheeks and says, honey, you know what you should do? What? You should curse God and just die. And he had a moment then. I know he did. I know he had a moment. I am not Job, but he had a moment when he thought, why, oh why, couldn't the house have fallen on her? She's not helpful. And as she wanders off, his friends begin to gather. They've heard of what's happened to Job, and they gather around him, and he begins to ask the question that all of us would ask in his shoes. Why? Why was I even born? Why did God let me grow up? Why didn't he just snuff me out early so I didn't have to face all of this grief and all of this heartache? Why? And his friends are like, oh, that's a good question. And after a while, they get tired of his whys, and they start going, well, I'll tell you why. And they venture theories about why this has happened. You know what it is you've ticked God off somehow, and he's getting back at you, or in the cosmic, scale of justice, you're not doing enough good. There's a little bit too much evil, or you've got something hidden in your life, don't you, Job, that you're not telling us about. Or they just go on and on and on and on. 34 chapters of speculation on the question why. And Job says, well, I don't think it's that because of this, but I'll tell you why. And they go back and forth, 34 chapters worth. And they never get to the bottom of it. Years ago, I was the pastor of Dalhousie Community Church. And if you lived in Calgary, you will certainly remember 2008, there was a murder-suicide in Dalhousie. A husband something snapped, and he killed his 2 kids, his wife, and their housekeeper or their nanny, and then went downstairs or went to where his little toddler was and stopped short just there and then killed himself. And in the media storm that erupted after that event, the next morning, the reporters and news people were out like swarming, trying to find something, anything about what had happened because they were trying to get a bead on the story. And so I was in church that morning. I was in the office, and they came to the door. And so in the course of just a few hours, I did an interview with the Calgary Herald, and I didn't even know the people. I was just the pastor in the area. I was on CBC News, and they're firing questions at me, and they knew I didn't know the family, but what they wanted to know is, what does a person of faith, especially from this community, what do you say in the midst of a tragedy like this? And I seriously, it was escalating. Like I actually turned down some interviews, like it was going, and I just got on my face and I said, God, you have to give me wisdom. I don't want to see something stupid. And what he told me was, don't try to answer why. Because, newsflash, you don't know. You don't. And you know as well as I do that when Christians try to answer why, I'll tell you why the planes flew into the Twin Towers. It's because of this and that and this sin and God's judging America. Shut up. You don't know. You have no idea. And I don't either. And so I talked about what I'm going to talk about today when I was in that interview. Now, you know as well as I do that pain has a way like nothing else in our lives of stirring up questions. And you know what? The why question is a critical question to ask on a practical level. In other words, if a bridge collapses, you have to ask why. Why did that happen? How did this happen? Because that will lead you to some structural inefficiency in the bridge. You can fix it so this will not happen again. But on a personal level, on a cosmic level, the why question is a black hole. I'm going to explain why. In this crisis, 34 chapters of trying to get to the bottom of why. It's the longest tirade in the entire Bible. They never make headway. You can read it yourself, but I'll just jump to the punchline. They never get there. And they're so focused on answering the why question that they miss an entire set of questions that could have actually helped Job. And the questions that God actually, when he showed up at the end of the story, brought around so that Job could be helped. Now, just so you know, the track of questions they should have been asking are not why questions, but who questions. And they never asked that question. They just assumed that they knew the answer to the question. Did you catch that? The servant said it right out. Fire from God, fire from heaven fell. In other words, God did this. Wasn't even a consideration. God did. And even Job, in his famous prayer, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. But did he? We're going to get to that. So fire from God, God did it, except he didn't. Just one verse before I started into this thing about what happened to Job, we realize that the story begins before Job is even aware that it started. That there's a conversation happening between God and the devil, God and Satan, in which God gives permission for Satan to do what happened to Job. Now, right away, you're going to go, well, that's the same thing. If God gave permission, then it's like he did it. No, it is not the same thing. What I'm talking about is this. Permission is another way of saying choice. You see, God created the universe with choice at the very center of it, even symbolically, in the middle of the Garden of Eden. If you read in the book of Genesis, in the very center of the garden, there are two trees. There's a choice at the center of the universe. And the moment any being, whether it be angelic or demonic or human or anything else, the moment a being of free choice makes a choice, they create something in the universe that God didn't create. Every choice I make creates something that God didn't directly create. Every choice that I make can either create something God wants or doesn't want. So every time someone chooses evil, they make something God didn't make. They choose something God didn't choose. They do something God didn't want to happen. In fact, God spends the rest of Scripture teaching us how to oppose that evil that people choose, and how to put it to flight, and how to be a light in the darkness, and how to bring love to hate, and how to bring peace to conflict. It's a very different picture. Now, what emerges through the pages of Scripture, if you follow the narrative all the way through, is that there are two very clearly different kingdoms. I know if you've grown up in church, you're going, yeah, I know this. But we don't live this way. Very different kingdoms. There is an evil kingdom, which is the kingdom of darkness that Satan's in charge of, and there is a good kingdom that God is in charge of. When Jesus showed up, in other words, when God himself took on flesh and walked among us and cleared his throat and cleared the record, there are things that he said. It was almost like there's places throughout the Scriptures like this. He says, I don't know how you understand the Old Testament, or this is what you used to think, but I'm telling you it's actually like this. And we have to listen, because this is God in the flesh setting the record straight. And what Jesus said about our cosmology, in other words, these two kingdoms and good and evil and the source of them, is this. He says, your enemy is a thief. This devil is a thief, and he comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. When you have stealing, killing, and destroying, who does that belong to? The thief. Second, he says, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. To the full. Job and his friends begin their response and their reaction to this tragedy by attributing it to God. That's like starting with the wrong answer in math and then adding things and doing things after that. Nothing else can be correct. They've started with the wrong presupposition. They attribute stuff to God, which means they end up, it's inevitable, they end up blaming God. They end up accusing God, and then Job inevitably gets to this point because God is nowhere to be seen in the rubble of his ruined life. He says, you know what? If God would appear right here, right now, I would put him on trial. I would make him answer for what he's done. If he would show up, I have such an airtight case. And he starts blaming. In other words, what he's done is he's moved from being a creation to the Creator. He's moved into this position where he is even judging God. He is the judge of what is good and what is evil. When you start with the wrong presupposition, this is why Jesus wanted to set the record straight. You inevitably put God in a position where you have to attribute, blame, accuse, and judge. He's like, please don't lump me in with that, or you will end up in the wrong spot. Here's a parable Jesus told. He goes, in my kingdom, when stuff goes sideways, in the kingdom of God, this good kingdom of light, when stuff goes sideways, look at this. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. And then the owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? God did it. God handicapped me to teach me something. God took my wife. God took my business. God trashed my relationship so that, wait a minute, an enemy did this. An enemy did this. Now, I understand. God can turn that frown upside down. He can take what the enemy intended for evil and turn it around and bring good out of it. There is no one better. In fact, that's what he does with all the evil that happens to our life. If we give our lives to him, he says, let's turn this around. Let's redeem this. Let's create good out of this bad. God does that. But back to Job. 34 chapters of asking, why did you do this, God? Why did you allow this, God? Why? And then God calls his bluff, and he shows up, driving a storm. And you talk about bass. There's lightning, and Job's like, whoa. And he arrives in all of his glory, and the earth is shaking. And then God flips the tables on him, and he begins to question Job. So Job's been firing out all these questions, and now God starts with this. The Lord said to Job, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God. See, this is what it had come to. Let him who accuses God answer him. In other words, Job, your turn. You've been wanting this day in the sun. You've been wanting this audience. You said, let the Almighty appear and I will question him. Here I am. Your move. Then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I'll say no more. In other words, I'm good. I thought I had a case, but now that I see you, now that I see how amazing you are and big you are and glorious you are, you know what? Never mind. I can't even remember my question. What? Why? I don't even see a why. I'm good. And this wasn't just because God bullied Job. It's not just that he arrived and went, what did you say? Nothing. And then he's secretly still, wondering about this question. It was literally that God unveiled who he was, and Job went, never mind. I'm good. Now, I know that that's really hard to fathom, but what we know is this, that why that you're wrestling with right now, that why that I'm wrestling with right now, what we have here is we have a story of somebody who got to the end of it. He said, why, wasn't satisfied. God showed up and he said, never mind. In other words, if that why that you have, however valid it seems to you, however painful and however, cavernous it feels in your insides, if God would appear in the flesh, something about that encounter would set you at ease just by being in his presence. Oh, so good. Here's the thing. God never answers his why directly. What God does is he takes Job's why and he answers it with a who. Remember the question they should have been asking right at the beginning. Who? There's never an answer to the why, except a who. He inserts himself as the answer to the why. Not because he caused it, but because God is the answer to everything that we lack. There was a kid when I was a youth pastor in Winkler. Some of you have heard this story that His dad was a biker dude, and he loved getting out on the open road. And one day, he was so close to home, just a few kilometers away from Winkler, where we were living. And there's a big intersection, a highway intersection there, and he was plowed under by a semi-truck, just obliterated, killed on contact. And this kid who was coming to our youth group was just devastated, as any of us would be, and just reeling in his faith. And in the months that followed, he obviously asked this question: why? Why did God take my dad? Well, God didn't take your dad. Well, then why did God allow it? Why? And we're grasping, we're looking through the scriptures. Why? And you see from Job's story that the people in your life that try to answer your why question for you, it's abuse. Because it always comes back to some form of blame. Don't try to answer why. But what I realized as I was watching this kid grapple, he doesn't want the answer to the question why. He wants his dad back. The answer to why isn't a what, it's a who. Your why doesn't need a good answer. It needs a good God. It needs a father. Some of you have so pushed God out of the picture because of what's happened in your life, and you've kept him at a distance. And I'm telling you, you don't need the answer to the question. You need your dad back. That's what you need. If you insist, and I insist, on the answer to the question why, we will never move past it, because there is no answer. If life needs to make sense and everything needs to work out right for God to be good, I'm just going to spare you the trouble right now. You might as well walk away, because the answer to that question always implicates God somehow. If everything's got to turn out right and it's God's fault and it's God's accountable, then it's not going to work out. We somehow, if we're going to have any faith at all, have to lay it on this thing called mystery and pain and suffering in this world. It's part of walking with God. Now, you know that I pray for sick people, and I've seen miracles. I've seen God do crazy things and turn things around, but we've also watched people that we've prayed for die. We've watched cancer ravage people. We've watched marriages implode when we were trying to help. And if all of that has to work out for God, in order for God to be good, it's already over. I'm telling you. You know what? Using Job as a story that teaches us and is meant to teach us this, I would actually say that when it comes to the big cosmic whys, humans are not meant to know. So here's a radical thought. What would it look like, that why that you're asking right now, the one you're wrestling with, what would it look like to lay that down? What would it look like if that never got answered and that would be okay? What would it look like if the answer isn't really what you're looking for? What you're looking for is a father in that gap. Here's the punchline. To see your pain clearly, you have to let God's who, Jesus, settle your why. When Jesus stepped into this world and took on flesh, took on our humanity, took on our pain, took on our suffering throughout his life, and spent his life giving it away, healing people, restoring, redeeming people, embracing people, and then was whipped and beaten and torn and bruised and pretty much beaten to a bloody pulp for you and I, taking those nails, dying in our place. He earned the right to become your who. He earned the right to become the answer to this question. We talked about Job. We said, look, in Job's case, we can see that if you ever met God face to face, it would be enough. And I'm telling you, if you come to the grips with what Jesus has done for you, which is represented on this table, I'll get to that in a minute. If you truly understood what Jesus has done for you, you would allow him to be the who that settles your why. When God's who becomes your why, you shift from a question, a gaping void, to a statement. The question becomes a statement. It becomes a foundation. It becomes something to build your life on. It becomes something to fall on, lean on. When someone asks, but why did that happen? I don't know, but I know who loves me and who gave himself for me. And I know who, on that cross, nailed between those beams, asked the why question once and for all. My God, why have you forsaken me? So that he could become the who, so that I never have to ask the question again. I can just trust him. Now, at this table, there are elements, and if you're new to church, just let me explain these for you. There's bread that symbolizes the body, the life that Jesus gave for us. And then the juice symbolizes the blood that Jesus shed to pay for all of our failures and all of our mistakes. So this symbol here that we participate in, when you take that bread, you're taking a symbol of Jesus becoming your who. And the blood, the juice symbolizes Jesus paying the price so that you could be made right with this Father that you ultimately long for. This is your way of saying yes to Jesus, either for the first time or to say yes to him again. But here's what I want you to do today. As Shauna comes up and leads us through this next song in particular, what we do here is we come forward to take these elements. It's our way of saying, God, don't just come to me. I'm taking a step. I'm coming to you. I'm responding to you. Here's what I'd like you to do. In your mind's eye, I want you to take this why that has haunted you. Whatever that is for you. Why did I lose this friend? Why did this person die? Why did my marriage end? Why did this dream die? Why? Whatever that is. I want you to picture you're holding that why in your hand. And then I want you to come to the table, and symbolically, I want you to lay it down for a who? Jesus.